This is a demonstration of the integration between the PDSAS.org application and using the Google APIs for both the Google Drive integration and Google Calendar integration. The two scopes that we're using are both the non-sensitive scope for Google Drive, which is drive.file scope, basically using the Google Picker, and the sensitive scope for the Google Calendar, which is the calendar.events.own scope. To be able to create calendar events in the user's Google Calendar, or show how the OAuth consent screen is used and displays and allows the user to grant access to the different scopes and demonstrate how the data is used. For the Google Drive, basically the data is used by picking from your Google Drive picker and adding those items from the Google Drive into the PDSAS application. And how the data is used for the Google Calendar, it's creating events in the user's Google Calendar. So we'll start the demonstration right now. We'll show how so when the user comes to the PDSAS or the standard line system, or first you come to this home page, we'll first show the three places that the Google Drive integration is used using the Google Drive API, the Google Picker, and the non-sensitive scope of drive.file. First, we'll go inside the ePortfolio. You see that there's the Add from Google Drive button. We'll click it. It opens up the consent screen. We'll see that the client ID is inside the URL bar. We will click the user that we're going to use. You see that this has not been verified by Google yet. It's in the verification process. We'll click Advanced, and we'll go to... We see here it's asking to grant access to these two scopes, both the Google Drive non-sensitive scope of drive.file and the sensitive scope for the Google Calendar, which is the calendar.events.owned. We'll click both of those to give access. And we'll continue. You see that it opens up the Google Picker. We'll find something to add here. We'll add this Things to Pack for Disney 2018. And there's Things to Pack for Disney 2018 added today, September 6th, 2022. So that's basically the integration between Google Drive and PDSAS using the drive.file scope. There's a couple more places within the application to do that. Inside Communities, I'll find a test community here, since this is a live site in production. We'll use this SAS test community. Inside you'll find, again, the Add from Google Drive button. We'll click that. We will see that the client ID is inside the URL navigation bar. We'll click the user to grant access. This application, this API has not been verified. Still with Google, still going through the verification process. We'll just continue here. We have already granted those two scopes, so we'll just continue again. And we'll pick something from a drive yet again. Oops. And we'll see that that was added. Things to pack for Disney 2018 to this as well. And the last place is when a user is building a lesson or lesson plan. They can add things from their Google Drive into that lesson plan using TinyMC Editor. You can insert from Google Drive. Again, we'll open up the consent screen, and you'll see that the client ID is in the navigation URL bar. We'll pick our user, our Google user, to give access to. This has not been verified. It's going through the verification process. It's not been verified with Google yet. Click Advanced. Our scopes were already chosen in a previous screen, both the Google Drive scope as well as the it's the drive.file scope, and the calendar.events.own scope. We'll continue here. And we'll find something to add. And you see that the link to that item in our Google Drive was added. Those are all the places that we integrate with Google Drive in the SAS application with the using the Google Picker and the drive.file non-sensitive scope. The other integrations with the Google Calendar using the calendar.events.own scope. Let's demonstrate that now. Let's go back to my lessons. And you will be able to add this to the Google Calendar. Let's open up a Google Calendar here. And oops. Got something to November. Let's add something to November 2nd here. Wednesday, November 2nd. So we're going to find the lesson plan that we want to add to our Google Calendar. We have this Add to Google Calendar link. So we'll click that. Again, the consent screen opens up. We have the client ID in the URL navigation bar. We'll be able to pick our Google user that we want to use to add something to our Google Calendar. We'll click Advanced. Because this has not been verified with Google, it's going through the verification process, this API integration. We'll click Continue. We've already picked our two scopes on a previous place, both the drive.file scope as well as the calendar.events.own scope. We'll click Continue. And we said we're going to put it on November 2nd, Wednesday, November 2nd. So we'll find that here. Oops, I picked the first. We'll do Wednesday, November 2nd. And we'll click Wednesday, November 2nd here as well. And we'll say Create. And now we look back at our calendar. There it is. A new lesson plan, which we can click into and go right back into SAS. I hope that demonstrates the integration of pdsas.org with the different APIs, the Google Drive API and the Google Calendar API, as well as demonstrates granting the OAuth process using the consent screens, demonstrating that the client ID is inside the URL navigation bar, how the data is used inside the application, be it getting data from Google Drive and adding it to SAS, or taking data from PDSAS and adding it a calendar event inside Google Calendar. And I hope it demonstrates what scopes are used, both the non-sensitive scope of drive.file and the sensitive scope of calendar.events.owned.